Also the politics surrounding the Sochi Games. One of them is the criticism of Russians' anti-gay laws, and there's a story in an article that's getting a lot of attention talking about the hypocrisy of the U.S. when it comes to this issue. William Eskridge co-wrote this article, and you are a law professor at Yale University. William Eskridge, welcome to KTRS here in St. Louis.
Thanks very much.
What's your bottom line on this?
Well, the bottom line is we should criticize the Russian law, but at the same time we should criticize the laws that exist in the United States that say the same thing, and that is that young people should not be exposed to the idea that gay people can be good.
But it seems like the laws in Russia are much more draconian than they are here in America. I mean, we just don't allow gays to marry here. It sounds like they're not allowed to walk the streets in Sochi.
Well, the point of the Russian law is not that gay people can't walk the streets, but that gay people cannot teach children that homosexuality is an acceptable form of life. And the state of Utah, where we hosted the 2002 Olympics, as well as a number of southern states like Texas and Alabama, have laws that do say exactly the same thing, that schools shall not teach that homosexuality is an acceptable lifestyle. And in some of those states, the law says that the schools have got to teach that homosexual intercourse is a crime in those states, even though it's not been an enforceable crime since 2003. So in that sense, the laws in the United States are in some ways worse, and in other ways very similar.
Except that, in your example of Utah, the Utah Supreme Court said those rules are unconstitutional.
It did not say those rules are unconstitutional. The Utah Supreme Court said that, well, there was a recent district court in Utah that actually said that under the U.S. Supreme Court's precedents, like Windsor, the defensive marriage case, gay people now have a right to marry in Utah as well as elsewhere. Now, that ruling is on appeal, and so we'll see what happens in the U.S. Court of Appeals. But the Utah statute has never been struck down either by a federal court or by a state court, and it's still the law in Utah. And the law in Utah is supposed to be you cannot teach that homosexuality is an acceptable lifestyle in the school system.
Also, in the state of Missouri, I believe homosexuals have a hard time, if not banned, from adopting children as well. But there's adoption laws all over the place barring homosexuals from adopting children, correct?
Well, interestingly, most states in the United States do allow openly lesbian and gay people to adopt. It's now very unusual to have a state that aggressively prohibits it, though the practice in many counties is discouraging. And the more important thing is that at least half of the states do not allow lesbian and gay couples jointly to adopt a child.
But in Russia, the mayor of Sochi said they don't have homosexuals in Sochi, and don't you have to register with the state if you're a guest in Russia, and or you can't get a visa if you're an open homosexual when you visit Russia?
Well, I don't know Russian law on that particular front. I will say that in the United States until 1990, if you were gay or lesbian, you were not supposed to be able to enter the United States as an immigrant, permanent, temporary, whatnot, that the United States, according to statute anyway, until 1990, was supposed to deny visas and passports and entry to people who were lesbian or gay. So that law was repealed, fortunately, in 1990 under the George H.W. Bush administration. So that's a recent federal law. And many states in the United States once had registration laws. The city of Los Angeles had a registration law. So these were not just southern states. These were states all over the country. Now, again, those laws are not only obsolete, but they have been repealed in the last generation in the United States.
William Eskridge is our guest. He's a law professor at Yale University. You co-wrote a story that appeared in the Washington Post. What's been the reaction since this story you wrote in the Washington Post?
Well, I think the reaction, we've gotten a lot of reactions, including people who say, wow, I didn't know that the United States had some laws like Russia. Why are these not laws being interrogated? We've had a lot of those reactions of surprise. And indeed, even on the Yale law faculty, most of the Yale law faculty did not know about these particular laws. We've also had reactions of, please don't compare us to Russia. Well, the fact of the matter is that the United States does have a good and justifiably good self-image of itself. We're very proud of ourselves. But there are things that are on the books that are law in the United States that we should not be proud of. This was true in the 50s when we said we're the leaders of the free world and we're non-discriminatory. And many of our states, not all of them, and not even most of them, but many of our states, by law, required segregation of the races.
But you have to at least. I mean, I understand there are discriminatory laws, and some people feel there are discriminatory laws. But Barack Obama, President Obama, is sending openly gay homosexuals to represent the United States. So even though the laws might not have caught up, there is certainly a civil rights struggle going on, and it seems like in Russia you can't openly, walk around as an open homosexual, and there's much more a discriminatory reaction in Russia than here in the United States.
Absolutely. Just as in the 1950s, American, and in the 1930s as well, American delegations to the Olympics were racially integrated. Good for the United States. The Eisenhower administration supported Brown. Good for the Eisenhower administration. But the fact of the matter is that the existence of apartheid in some states in the United States in the 1950s was inconsistent with the ideals that we hold out nationally. And so our point is not to criticize President Obama, whom we admire on this issue, but to say that President Obama is right in criticizing Russia, and that the United States, if it agrees with President Obama's criticism of Russia, also needs to look internally at the states that still openly say that they discriminate against gay people, including requiring propaganda to be taught to children, some of which is untrue. It is not true that homosexuality is a lifestyle. It is not true that homosexual intercourse is illegal. It cannot be illegal in the United States after 2003. It is not true that homosexual sex, as North Carolina says, is the form of sex that leads to AIDS. There are lots of different kinds of intercourse, and frankly, the safest sex in the United States is usually sex between lesbians, which is a form of homosexual sex, and which really does not contribute to the AIDS epidemic.
Let me ask you this question. There are people who say that, one, should the U.S. boycott the Sochi Olympics because of this?
Not in my opinion.
Okay.
We didn't boycott the Olympics in Germany in the 1930s, and Jesse Owen won gold medals. And that was a great moment, sort of in your face to the Nazis. I agree with President Obama. Let's take our athletes to the Olympics, some of whom are openly gay from this country and others, and let's put we're going to thumb our noses at the Russian law. We don't like the Russian law. We don't agree with it. And there are excellent gay athletes who are going to show that the Russian law is a lie. And that has encouraged a lot of discourse within Russia. So, yeah, criticize. The point of the First Amendment is that we should criticize. The point of free speech is that we should say this attitude is the correct attitude, this other attitude is misleading, it's diluted, it's false, and that's what we're doing.
I think what's more interesting is that American athletes come out after their playing days. Johnny Weir, the ice skater, came out afterwards. Brian Boitano was not openly gay while he was playing. Billie Jean King, she was not openly gay. It seems like these athletes, we haven't had an athlete who has come out who is in the prime of their career still playing in the game.
I think that's correct. And what that's an indication of is that homo anxiety in the last 20 years still does characterize American culture, particularly perhaps athletic culture. I think what you're going to see in the next 20 years, the post-discrimination era, is the normalization of gay athletes. You now do see basketball players and football players, a few, coming out during their playing careers. You did not see that even 10 years ago. We're seeing that. We're going to see that in the tennis and the other athletic world. We're going to see that in figure skating. We're going to see that in swimming. There's some excellent athletes all over the world in the prime of their career who have now come out. But your observation is quite correct, and that's to be regretted, but that is something that is changing. And the way that attitudes change is by the kind of conversation that we're having right now on the radio, criticizing not only the Russian law, but laws in the United States that take an ignorant, disparaging, and actually very harmful attitude towards something that the legislators probably don't understand very well.
William Eskridge wrote a story, article, co-authored a story in the Washington Post that got a lot of attention about the homosexual laws here in America as well as in Russia. You're a Yale law professor. Last question for you, William Eskridge. Did you write this because you're just interested in this? Are you openly gay yourself? Is that why you're more curious about this, or is it just the hypocrisy of it all?
Well, I think all those reasons. My co-author, Ian Ayers, also at the Yale Law School, is openly straight, and he's openly married to a woman who is a fabulous dean of a major law school, and I'm openly gay, and we both think that this is an important public law issue, not just for Russia, but also for the United States. And so there was a lot of press attention to Russia, quite appropriately. And we suggested this is the point of intellectuals. Intellectuals bring to bear bodies of knowledge that might not be in the mainstream media or might not be part of public discussion. And so we throw it out there. We threw out some accurate knowledge for people to consider as they ponder the injustice of President Putin's position and the law that he's promulgated.
William Eskridge, you're a Yale law professor, so you're pretty smart, but trying to have a factual conversation on radio in 2013 is very difficult these days.
Well, I believe that you've accomplished it.
Just don't tell anybody. William Eskridge, thank you very much for your time. Good luck.
Thank you very much, McGraw.
You got it. It's 8:48 here, Big 550 KTR.